Is it picking up the sound now? Is it picking it up now? Is it picking up now? Oh, okay. No, that's okay. Test one, two. Do we want to try it up there or just rely on that microphone? Oh, there's another mic here. There's another one. We want to try live stream this across all of our social channels. Oh my God. No pressure. I know, right? Can you hear the sound into this, Catherine? She's too busy to do an interview right now. Can you hear it into this? Yeah? Maybe we just leave it here.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us here today to be interested in the real cost measure and how that's impacting our community that we all love so much. I definitely want to thank the San Diego Foundation for hosting us here in their beautiful facility. We're here often, and we know everybody loves being here. More microphones. I love microphones. I really don't like microphones. But anyway, I am happy to be here. I'm pleased to have Henry Gascon with us today. He is the Director of Program and Policy Development at United Ways of California. And United Ways of California is our statewide office for all of the local United Ways, so we really rely on them a lot on these kind of statewide types of things. In his role, he leads the policy research and analysis, the engagement work with all of our local United Ways. He is the co-author of the Real Cost Measure in California, which introduces a self-sufficiency standard that conveys the real cost of living in California and promotes the Human Development Index, which discusses well-being in health, education, and financial stability. And you'll hear from him why this is different than the federal poverty level. And it's very, very different, and it's much more inclusive of all of the costs that it takes to live here in San Diego County. So some of the numbers you probably know, but now you're going to know the exact number to apply to that issue that people are facing. Before we hear from Henry, I do want to introduce to you Senator Steve Padilla. We are very excited to have him join us here today. He was elected to the Senate in November of 2022 and representing the counties of San Diego, Imperial, Riverside, and San Bernardino. That's a lot, Senator. That's a big area. Thank you. Anyway, he's a native of San Diego. He's a graduate of Bonita Vista High School. He's a lifelong Chula Vista resident. Yeah, right. Senator Padilla has dedicated his life to public service. I didn't know this about him, but prior to actually being an elected official, he was in law enforcement. He served for 13 years. He was in the city of Chula Vista. Oh, surprise. And then he concluded his public service work in law enforcement at the city of Coronado, where he served as a detective specializing in domestic violence and child abuse. You know, Senator, I've always wondered that people that have to or get to or do live in that world of domestic violence and child abuse, I wonder how your perspective of the community really gets skewed, because that's what you live and breathe, and it seems to happen all the time, which is a very difficult one, but thank you for doing that work. His interest in public affairs actually began very early in life, as did his service to Chula Vista. He served as a member of the Board of Ethics and Safety Commission. He was elected for the first time to the City Council in 1994 and served 2 terms. In 2002, he was elected the city's 38th mayor and served from 2002 to 2006. He later returned to office in 2016, couldn't stay away, huh? 1 year later, was appointed for the second time to the California Coastal Commission, where he served as chairman from 2019 to 2021. Prior to being elected to the state Senate, he worked with a variety of private entities, nonprofit organizations, and public interest groups, advocating on economic development projects and transportation, housing, environmental, and social justice issues. In 2008, he served as a member of the Independent Task Force on U.S. Immigration Policy for the Council on Foreign Relations. He is noted for being the first person of color ever elected to city office in Chula Vista. Now that's Chula Vista, you guys. Really? Like he was the first. Okay, never mind. He holds undergraduate degrees in liberal arts and public administration from Southwestern College. Guess where that is? National University, and studied law at Western State University College of Law. He has been a published columnist, writing on local, state, and national policy issues. He is a proud father to Ashley, an accomplished professional in, guess what, political and policy advocacy. And his son-in-law, Nelson, a former political staffer and current U.S. Navy officer, so we thank him for his service. But all of that, when you look at the whole background of everything that he's doing, it's no wonder that he really cares about the community and has a perspective on so many of these issues that we're dealing with. So help me welcome Senator Steve Padilla.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Wow, that was a lot. I was telling.
He said it all.
Oh, well, I was telling my district director, Mr. Fergosi here, I said, this is the part when they all figure out just how old I really am. Yeah. If you stick around long enough, you can get exposed to just about anything. And thank you for your warm welcome. It's really an honor. One thing you probably, if you get to know me at all, is policy nerd is usually something that I describe myself with. And thinking that the limited time those of us who have the honor of serving in public life have really motivates, I think, most of us to be very deliberate and clear about where can you have the most impact in a limited amount of time. And I think maybe through a combination of my own professional experience as well as my personal experience. Good morning, Madam Pro Tem. Our Pro Tem, Toni Atkins, she can't walk in a room without being recognized. I know she'll get a better intro later. But perhaps that in my own lived experience really makes me, as one member of many talented folks in the Senate, begin to think a little bit about what are the systemic core driving dynamics and issues that sort of cross all the boundaries and have some intersection and commonality with all of the things that we talk about in California. Professional, personal education, skill development, right? The marketability of someone's work and labor to be able to participate in California's economy, the ability to shelter and house, someday build wealth and own a home, right? To have access to housing, to be able to meet your basic needs, to be able to proactively maintain your health. We talk about healthcare, we talk about infrastructure, we talk about housing, we talk about social and economic justice issues, environmental justice issues, environmental health. Everything we talk about intersects with the fundamental understanding of not just the quantification of cost to meet your basic needs, but how that might inform policymakers, right? So for me, one of the biggest areas of focus that I have stepped out with and will continue to make a priority during my service in the Senate is addressing something that is sad and unique, but growing around this nation, and particularly here in California. And it's two words that don't belong in the same sentence: working poverty. What the heck does that mean? Well, let me scare you a little bit and remind some of you what that means. That means that a growing segment, and I emphasize growing, of California's overall workforce, particularly our entry-level workforce, that means folks who are earning minimum wage, who are low-wage earners, are economically stranded and stuck in a way that our grandparents never were. Now I'm going to really sound old. Back in the good old days, the way it used to work was you started out young while you were in school or learning a trade, maybe still living at home part-time or 1 foot at home and 1 foot somewhere else, striking out on your own. If you didn't come from a wealthy family without a trust fund, you worked your way through school, you worked part-time. But you had the ability to earn some money at the beginning entry-level sort of piece of our workforce, and then to develop your skills and knowledge in school. It took a lot of work. But you could have economic mobility. You could move from the entry-level segment of California's workforce and eventually to a different segment of that workforce, growing your marketability, growing your skills, and your ability to participate in our economy along the way. Today, that is very, very different. A larger and larger segment of that entry-level wage earner, low wage earner, minimum wage earner of California's workforce, rely upon those types of jobs for their livelihood in percentages that our grandparents didn't. You may have done that work, you may have been in that segment of the workforce, but you didn't depend upon that employment for your survival. Today, more and more Californians rely upon those entry-level jobs for their survival. In addition to that, the relative spending power that they had decades ago, compared to the cost escalators, which when you get into the real cost measure, you guys are going to understand multidimensionally what that really looks like. They have less to spend, really, even though adjusted for inflation on the surface, it looks like they earn more on an hourly wage. But the power of that earning is far diminished from where it was decades ago. So you have that working against you, right? And they're having to work more and more hours just to meet the baseline in a way that our grandparents didn't. So today in California, we have more and more people at the entry level of our workforce working 60, 70, 80, 90 hours a week, just to make ends meet. And even at that level of output, that level of effort, that level of sacrifice, some of our more recent studies show that someone working full-time and entry-level wage levels can't afford housing in any market in the United States. And the fundamental piece of that is wage standards, right? Marketability of labor. We still demand their labor in California. We still demand their labor, unless we envision a California where, venture capitalists and billionaires are waiting tables in our restaurants, or unless in California we're going to stop going to restaurants, which I highly doubt. So we have to think about, as we look at quantifying costs and understanding the multidimensional demands of what it takes to live in a state like California or a region like San Diego County, what are we thinking about in terms of policy that can help be a partner with individuals to help them better develop their skills, get an advantage, and not be stuck in that place the way that so many Californians and San Diegans are stuck? Because I tease some of my friends in the Capitol that I have healthy debates with. You can build 1 million units of new housing tomorrow and subsidize half of it, and two largest segment of full-time and more workers in California won't be able to afford any of affordable product. Think about that for a minute. They won't be able to afford affordable, because no matter how hard they work, no matter how much they put out, it economically is not enough to sustain them to the level that they can actually participate in a progressive way in our economy. That's a fundamental problem. And it's a fundamental problem that I believe we need to address in California. So the work that United Ways is doing to quantify a real understanding on the demand side of what it costs to live, not just in places like San Diego, but all over the state, is really critical and important work. The first bill I crossed, the very first, as a freshman, was SB 352, which for the very first time in California history would require the Department of Labor and the board to actually establish a baseline formula for how you decide and get to a minimum wage standard. Believe it or not, even though we created a minimum wage standard for the first time at the turn of the 20th century, we never created one. We have a lot of good political fights these days about what the escalator looks like and what the increases look like, but there's no baseline formula. And there certainly isn't one that is linked to housing costs. And that's what that bill would have done, is it would have created a formula to understand what's required to set a minimum housing wage in California. It would require that to be reported every year to the legislature, because information is power. And think about the cool things you could do with data like that. You could revisit safety net thresholds. You could look at large employers who have the margin that you could provide a package of incentives for those large-scale employers to choose a living housing wage and put more of their employees in a position to actually live somewhere near where they work. I won't give up on that bill. It's going to be back. And I won't give up on continuing to work with amazing partners like United Ways of California, who are laser focused on dealing with, again, something that I'm going to be laser focused on, but again, are two words that don't belong in the same sentence, and that's working poverty in California. It's a fundamental challenge. It's something that your work and collaboration does. It's so important. And I was pleased to make that my first bill. I'll introduce it 100 times during my tenure if I need to, and put some tweaks on it and working with other partners. But it does inform everything I think about when I am asked to think about policies on housing and workforce development and public health and on and on. It is at the root of all of those issues. And so this work is important. And I want to thank United Ways again for your amazing partnership this past year, particularly on 352. And I congratulate you and I thank you for all the work that you are doing and that you're going to continue to do. And to all of the participants that are here today, thanks for being here and thanks for your interest and collaboration. And thank you, Nancy. Appreciate you very much.
Thank you.
Hello. Really appreciate it. That's perfect. Thank you so much. Let's give another round of applause for Senator Padilla. Thank you so much. And it's been a real privilege of working with you and championing SB 352, and we continue working. Look forward to working with you to address the cost of living crisis here in California. Thank you for Senator Atkins is here as well, If you need to go for whatever reason early, feel free to interrupt me and I'll be more than happy to give you the microphone if you want to address the audience. And that's completely fine too. So welcome everybody. My name is Henry Gascon and I'm glad to be here on behalf of United Ways of California. And we're just really proud of the work that United Way of San Diego has done in the community, led by Nancy. She's done a great job in gearing a lot of the education work and the financial stability work in the county. And just thank you for your leadership here and for your entire team for your support in making this event a reality. And of course, to Catalyst and for the San Diego Foundation for hosting us today. Thank you so much. So before we actually get into the presentation, I want to go through a little bit of an interactive exercise with you. Imagine you're part of a family of 4. You all have 2 adults in your family, a preschooler, and a school-age child. Uh-oh, the reality is setting in here. Think about the community that you live in, your own neighborhood. Think about what it would cost to make ends meet. So let's look at housing. Family of 4, a school-age child, a preschooler. Give me an amount. What would you need to afford housing in your neighborhood? Shout it out.
120K.
Okay, a year. Give me monthly figures for housing.
4,000.
4,000. Okay. What community? What neighborhood?
North Park.
North Park. Okay. Who else?
10,000.
Okay. How much?
I would say 10,000.
10,000. Wow. Okay. Any other estimates? You know your neighborhood better than we do. Family of 4, 2 adults, 1 preschooler, 1 school-age child. What does it take to afford housing per month? Guesses? Okay. Quite a big variance there in terms of those 2 amounts. What about childcare? 2,000. Okay. Any other estimates? Some of you may be going through it right now. Okay. What about healthcare? Family of 4. Does it matter if you have employer-sponsored health coverage, if you're paying out of pocket? What are you paying monthly for healthcare coverage? 400, 500, 600, 1,500, right? We never know what needs our families have on any given day. What else? Transportation, right? We know how much gas has changed over the past couple of years. It could include your car payment, it could include maintenance, ongoing costs, monthly. What would you put on for a family of 4 for transportation? 1,500, it's a lot. Yeah. Getting from one end of San Diego County to the next is not easy sometimes, right? Absolutely. All right, and then what about everything else? You usually put a 10% for miscellaneous, but what do you spend outside of that? So much. Right. Right. Schools have started, school supplies are starting to come into effect, right? Kids are gonna have the prom in spring, right? Saving up for those costs and everything else. So just keep some of those numbers in mind as we go through this. Okay. Now I want to talk about the official poverty measure. What do you know about the official poverty measure and how it's calculated? It's super low, yes, that's correct. What else? It's consistent across the country, that's right. So the official poverty measure is exactly the same as it is in Alabama, as it is in California. How many of you remember the TV series The West Wing? Okay, I see lots of hands raised up. So I'm going to show you a little video clip, and they can actually help put the official poverty measure in context. And I hope this isn't too loud.
On Monday, the OMB is putting out a new formula for calculating the poverty level.
I saw that. Does it need presidential approval before it goes to Congress?
Yeah.
What's the problem?
It's a good news, bad news thing. Under the new formula, poverty is up 2%. It was anyone under 17,524 before. Now it's 20,000.
What does that shake out to?
4 million new poor people.
4 million?
Obviously, that's the bad news.
Yeah,
The good news is that more people will be eligible for benefits.
and taxpayers are nuts about that. Let's get back to the bad news. 4 million people became poor on the president's watch.
They didn't become poor. They were poor already. And now we're calling them poor.
What was wrong with the old formula?
I don't know.
Find out.
It's possible that this is a statistical reality and not a political fight.
We'll get with someone at OMB and find out what was wrong with the statistical reality of the old formula.
Yeah.
Do it today.
Yeah.
It's like when I did the thing with the SAT scores and I got dumber 20 years after I went to college.
It's a little like that.
Talk to somebody.
It's good.
Sam.
Yeah.
Bernice Collette.
Thanks.
Hey, Sam.
How you doing, Bernie?
Not wild about people calling me Bernie.
Sure. What should I call you?
Bernice is fine.
Or how will you know I'm your buddy?
I'm okay living in the dark on that.
Okay. Can you tell me how the current standard was reached?
The new one?
The current one. The new one hasn't been signed off on.
We have to sign off on it.
Why?
It's much more accurate.
How was the old one reached? The current one.
In 1963, an Eastern European immigrant named Molly Orshansky, who was working over in Social Security, came up with it. Food was the most costly living expense where she came from.
Our cost of living formula for the last 40 years has been based on life in Poland during the Cold War.
This is what I'm talking about. Food doesn't account for 1/3 of a family's budget. Housing is more expensive than food. The current model also doesn't take into account transportation and health insurance. So let's call the current model the old model and sign off on the new model.
So,
So a little bit of a context here. The only correction I'll make to Aaron Sorkin is that the official poverty measure was created by Molly Orshansky, who was born in Brooklyn. She wasn't an Eastern European immigrant. So we created a self-sufficiency standard that incorporates the cost of housing, food, healthcare, childcare, transportation, and the other basic needs of life for a more accurate measure of what it takes to make ends meet in California. So that that clip from the West Wing was aired back in 2001, I believe, and we still never really adjusted that official poverty measure, right? So it's exactly the same. We just keep adjusting it for inflation each and every year. And as I mentioned before, it doesn't take into account geographical differences in the cost of living. So it treats, we know the cost of living is very different, as I mentioned before, in Alabama versus California, we know versus Santa Clara County and San Diego County as well. So the real cost measure really takes this into account, which is fantastic. And the focus of the real cost measure is on working households. So we're talking about individuals here, and the way that we calculate it is we exclude for households led by persons with disabilities and for seniors. And we partner with UCLA. They produce the Elder Index every couple of years, and they pretty much find that 33% of seniors struggle to make ends meet every single month. What's probably one of the biggest barriers that they face every single month for seniors? Rents, what else?
Healthcare.
Healthcare, yeah, absolutely. The prescription drugs and their healthcare costs, actually that gets more expensive as we grow older, and that's one of the biggest daily expenses that many seniors have to face on a regular basis. So the first thing that we did to create this real cost measure formula is we calculated household budgets. And we have great people in our team who calculated this, but we looked at every adult from 1 adult in a household all the way to 19 adults in a household. It's pretty robust for all 58 counties in California. So on average, it's about 1,200 household budgets that we calculated. And we have a cool little interactive calculator, which I'll show you at the end, where you can select the county that you live in, put in the age numbers of everybody in your household, and it will show you the minimum that the household has to earn to make ends meet. It's a pretty cool little tool, and you can use it on mobile as well. And then here's what we did differently. We actually got the American Community Survey data, which comes from the US Census, and we wanted to find out who's struggling behind these numbers. So we're able to go ahead and paint pictures in terms of Black households, Latino households, single mothers, households with young children, and I'll paint that picture for you later today. And then we have great data. So we want to look at state level data, regional level data, like Southern California and San Francisco Bay Area. We want to look at county level data, but we also want to look at neighborhoods within the county. We know that San Diego is huge, and the neighborhoods are really different from one place to another. Using public use microdata areas, it's just a census term. I call them neighborhood clusters, and what they just do is they consolidate neighborhoods to get a sample size of at least 100,000 people to make it statistically reliable. And the great thing about the real cost measure is that we use a 99% confidence interval. So if we keep repeating the numbers and recalculating it, it's going to show up the same way 99% of the time. So it's really great in terms of the way that we were able to do this. So I'm not going to walk out too much on the methodology, but I just want to show that we use all publicly available government data sources to calculate the real cost measure. And our goal here is to establish what's the minimum standard that a household needs to earn to make ends meet. So in doing so, we look at the fair market rent rates by HUD. It's often used to determine Section 8 housing, but we know that the cost of housing is certainly significantly higher than that. So that's a baseline, right? We use a low-cost food plan by the U.S. Department of Agriculture to look at food costs. We use the consumer expenditure survey to look at average transportation and healthcare costs at the county level. And we use 10% of miscellaneous needs. And we've gotten really good at calculating taxes, particularly if we're looking at working households. We need to take a look at payroll taxes, right? So it really speaks into the realities that many families are dealing with. And we've gotten really good at incorporating childcare and childcare tax credits into our formula. So what does it take to make ends meet? It really depends on the size of the household, where you live, and the ages of the children in the household. And we'll explain why that's so important. So for our family of 4, that same example that we just talked about, 2 adults, 1 preschooler, 1 school-age child, we calculate that this family at a minimum has to earn about over $110,000 annually to make ends meet. That's the baseline. Does that surprise you? No. Okay, not intense. So let's take a look at what the income level looks like for this family of 4 below the real cost measure. Who's struggling under this household type? So on average, this family of 4 gets about $64,000 in earnings in San Diego County. They get $325 on average in SSI, $310 in CalWORKS, which is the California version of the federal temporary assistance for needy families program. And they get about $1,600 in retirement, so it could be average. There might be seniors in the household that could be contributing to that. And about almost $1,200 with the earned income tax credit, which is one of the most successful anti-poverty programs that we have here in the United States, in addition to Social Security. So when you add that all up, it's about it's almost $69,000 in earnings. But look at the gap that this family has to reach to reach real cost measure. To reach real cost measure, $42,000. So the question for you is, how do they do it? How do they do it every day? So it really varies from family to family. They would try to negotiate with their landlord to see if they can pay half this month and catch up with the rest the following month. They would try to skip out on transportation costs, going out and doing whatever it is to make sure that the family has a roof over their head and has food to eat. These are the sacrifices that the families have to make every single day, and it really varies from family to family. So let's take a look at the geographical differences in the cost of living. So we noticed, like we mentioned before, that the real cost measure. I'm gonna make. I see tilting heads. I'm gonna make sure you get the slide deck. So don't worry, you'll get the talking points, and you'll be able to take this home with you. But look at the cost of living in San Diego County. It's higher on average for this family of 4 than compared to LA and Ventura counties. Now we're able to place some context in terms of the cost of living here in San Diego County. Right? But notice the big outlier, Marin County. We calculate it would take this family of 4 with 1 preschooler, 1 school-age child, $146,000 in income to make ends meet in Marin County. So it really speaks to what really California really looks like and the challenges that we're facing. So now I want to get a little bit to the weeds here. I want to look at 3 different family types. I want to look at 2 adults by themselves. I want to look at the same example, 2 adults, 1 preschooler, 1 school-age child, and look at the cost of living when that family, when those kids grow older, when they become a teenager and a school-age child. What's the biggest difference between the second and third columns? Childcare. Yeah, that's right. It goes from about $18,000 on average to about $7,000. What goes up slightly? Food. Teenagers get hungry, right? So for those of you who are teenagers, it's 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. They open up the refrigerator. They kind of empty everything out after football practice or whatever after school activity. 6 or 7 o'clock comes around. They open the refrigerator door. Everybody's looking around. Where's dinner? This could be a general intervention opportunity to educate your kids about the cost of food And then you can actually just talk to them about the other household expenses. So this is also a financial literacy tool that you can actually just use within your own family to talk about the cost of living and how much it's going to cost them after they graduate from college to live independently, right? So it can never start too early in terms of educating about the cost of living.
Especially if you want to stay in California.
Especially if you want to stay in California. So exactly, we're seeing lots of college kids who are actually coming back home and staying home because they can't afford to live independently, even if they were to cohabitate with friends. So it's just the reality of the housing challenges that we're dealing with right now, as Senator Padilla mentioned. So overall, we find that the official poverty measure in California usually hovers between 11 and 14%, right? That really means nothing. I mean, people really feel poverty. They experience them each and every day. They have the financial stress. They have the emotional stress, the psychological stress. So now we're able to put some numbers behind it. We find that up to 36% of families in San Diego County are struggling to make ends meet. And when we quantify that, that's 350,000 households. That's over a third of the household population in San Diego County. That's significant. So let's put some context into who these families are, who are really struggling below the real cost measure. There's a great book by Jonathan Murdoch and Rachel Schneider called The Financial Diaries. And they interviewed lots of struggling families throughout the country a few years ago. And one of the things that they found out is the biggest challenges for many of these families is inconsistent income throughout the entire calendar year. So for those of you who are familiar with retail, for example, you know the challenges that retail workers face every day. It's seasonal inconsistent income. As the holidays are coming up, they're going to be asked to increase their hours, and hence they get an increase in pay. January to February comes along, and they're asked to decrease those hours, which means less income for the household. So you can see that inconsistent income web throughout the entire calendar year for many families below the real cost measure that exists in retail, in manufacturing, and in other sectors as well. So here's the big point. 3.7 million households in California are struggling to make ends meet, and when we quantify that, that's 34% of the population. So here's what it looks like throughout California. We created this gradient map. The darker color areas and the dark brown areas, I wish we had better lighting, but they indicate more degrees of struggle, and the lighter yellow areas indicate less degrees of struggle. Look at the degree of struggle in the Central Valley and San Bernardino counties and many coastal communities as here. Los Angeles sticks out. Los Angeles County, if it was its own state, it would be the 8th largest in the union by population, right? We're not going to talk about electoral math impacts, but it's huge, right? But look at the big disparities in terms of the neighborhoods. 76% of families in the community of East Vernon, right in the heart of South Los Angeles, are struggling to make ends meet, compared to only 11% of households in the community of Lafayette, Orinda, Moraga, and Walnut Creek. Right? This could be the difference between Jupiter and Mars, right? For many families in terms of the ability to make ends meet. And as we talked about, 36% of households in San Diego County struggling to make ends meet. That's 350,000 households. Let's look at the map for San Diego County in terms of the degree of struggle, right? And look, you know how huge San Diego County is and how long it takes from going on the 5 to the 8 freeways. But notice how it's almost its own different country. You can actually just see the degree of struggle in Oceanside and Camp Pendleton and Escondido and versus Chula Vista and National City. So look at the disparities. 59% of households in Chula Vista, the western part of that city, and National City are struggling to make ends meet compared to 16% of households in Encinitas. What is that? Probably a 20-minute commute on a good day, right? But notice the degree of struggle that you're seeing within the county itself. So this map actually presents a great opportunity in terms of what can we do to help serve communities that are struggling the most. And we'll be having that conversation hopefully with our panel later today. So I created this interactive bubble chart for you to just show over time what the real cost measure looks like. So we've been producing the real cost measure every couple of years since 2015. And you can actually just see in 2014, about 392,000 households fell below the real cost measure. Compare that to 127,000 households. So what we did to compare apples to apples is that we recalculated the official poverty measure to match the same methodology as the real cost measure. So we excluded for households led by persons with disabilities and for seniors. So if we play the history of the world over time, you can actually just see how the real cost measure has just changed a little bit over over time. And you can actually, in 2021, this is the latest data that we have from the US Census Bureau, you can actually just see the big disparities, 350,000 below the real cost measure compared to almost 87,000 below the real cost measure. So in 2014, we found 33% of households over 392,000 fell below the real cost measure in San Diego County compared to 350,000 here in 2021. So that's an improvement of 42%. So it means that less families are struggling over time, but 36% is still a lot. But either way, the real cost measure is 304% higher than the official poverty measure. 304%, right? So this is huge. That's a difference of over 263,000 households. And here's a big point that I want to make about households who are falling below the real cost measure. At least 97% of them have at least one working adult. So these are not families that are looking to take advantage of the public benefit system. They're working hard. And as we showed you, even if this family of 4 below the real cost measure was able to take advantage of all the public benefits that are available to them, they would still face over a $40,000 gap to make ends meet. So this is significant in terms of what it looks like. And many of these families are often working 2, 3, 4 different jobs, different hours of the day, different types of salaries on an hourly basis in order to make ends meet. Now, if we want to take a look at the intersection between race and the real cost measure, we have some really good data. So this is astounding. 54% of Latino households in San Diego County are struggling to make ends meet. And when we quantify that, it's 193,000 households. And this mirrors a lot about what we're seeing throughout the entire state, is that Latino households struggle the most, even though they're now the largest population here in California. So you can actually just see how our data really intersects a lot of the social science research out there, that Black and Latino households struggle the most, and you can actually see it here. 48% of Black households struggle to make ends meet in San Diego County, 35% of Asian American households, compare that to 26% of white households. But I want to change the number around. This is the rate of struggle within each of these racial groups. Here's what it looks like by the numbers. Look at the largest group that's struggling. It's white households in San Diego County, about 143,000, and the second highest group is Latino households. So normally we find that the white households are the second highest group throughout the state that are struggling the most. But in San Diego County, we have an exception. It's white households that are struggling the most. So that certainly brings up some interesting questions for us today. And if we take a look at the intersection between educational attainment, we know that during the 1950s and 60s, if you had a high school diploma, you're pretty much assured of being able to make ends meet for your family, right? We had stronger labor protections, we had unions, and the economy was a lot different than it certainly is here in 2023. 74% of households led without a high school diploma are struggling to make ends meet in San Diego County, compared to 21% with those with a bachelor's degree. So I think that 21% is high, right? And so this is bringing in a lot of the conversation in terms of, you actually need a graduate degree to ensure your family's self-sufficiency. And the jury's still out, but you can actually just see in terms of how difficult it is for many families to make ends meet regardless of the educational achievement status. We also looked at the single mothers, right? A very vulnerable population. 73% of single moms struggle to make ends meet in San Diego County. That's about 46,000 households. So just think about the sacrifices that they make. They're not only their breadwinner for their families, but they're also the entire emotional support system for their families. They're responsible for making sure that they wake up in the morning to go to school, have breakfast, being able to do their homework after school, are tucked in at night. And often, because of the challenges of single moms who work different hours, they're not able to be there during these moments in their kids' lives to help them out, to make sure that their schoolwork is done. So often what we see is, siblings taking care of their younger siblings to making sure that they're getting their homework done. And you can actually and making sure that dinner is fed in the afternoon because the mom is working so hard to make ends meet. So these are the pictures, the portraits that we're trying to paint for families below the real cost measure. And now we want to take a look at conjugal status. We even find some interesting data here. 51% of single dads are struggling to make ends meet in San Diego County. We've already talked about that population compared to about 30% of married couples. But I found this data point pretty interesting. About 12,000 households led by single fathers fall below the real cost measure. However, we see 150,000 married couples who are falling below the real cost measure in San Diego County. So the numbers really speak volumes in terms of who's behind that 30%. 150,000 is quite a bit. Right? So that's almost it's half of the real cost measure population, 350,000 households. So 56% of households with children under the age of 6 fall below the real cost measure, and that's 75,000 households. So this is where the childcare is really important. We're even seeing in many instances throughout California that families are spending more on childcare than they are on housing. And you can actually just imagine in some cases childcare isn't available, seats aren't available, but it's also a good opportunity to think about the childcare workers themselves. There's high turnover in that industry because many of them fall below the real cost measure themselves, right? So there's an opportunity for us as childcare providers to look at what we can actually do, not only support the kids, but also the workers who are working every single day to make sure that those kids are being taken care of, but who are also struggling to put dinner on their table in the evening as well. So housing and childcare are the two primary barriers that are preventing families to make ends meet in San Diego County. 42% of families in San Diego County pay at least 30% of their income on housing. So this is a number that goes well beyond the real cost measure. Regardless of whether you fall above or below the real cost measure, the cost of housing is certainly a big barrier in terms of affordability. And when we quantify that, that's 416,000 households in San Diego County that are paying at least 30% of their income on housing. That's about 75,000 families more than the real cost measure that we showed you earlier. And look at the degree of housing burden. The percentage of families who are spending at least 30% of their income on housing. 41% of families in the Central Coast. 44% in Greater LA, which includes Ventura counties, and 42% in Greater San Diego, which includes San Diego and Imperial counties. Is anybody here from Imperial County? No. We find that your neighbors to the east, the real cost measure there is at 44% of families who are struggling to make ends meet in Imperial County. But you can actually just see how the degree of housing affordability is prevalent throughout the entire state, even in the Central Valley and the San Francisco Bay Area. And San Francisco Bay Area, of course, is one of the more affluent areas in the country, but we still see 35% of families there who are spending at least 30% of their income on housing. And this data speaks to it. At least 25% of families above the real cost measure spend at least 30% of their income on housing. Compare that to about 57% below RCM. And we're finding that in many cases, for many families, the farther below you fall below the real cost measure, many of these families could easily be spending 60, 70, or 80% of their income on housing all by itself. Here's the housing burden data. Look at the coastal communities. Look at all the areas that are, all the families that are spending at least 30% of their income on housing. Oceanside and Camp Pendleton, right? 52% of families are spending at least 30% of their income on housing there, compared to about 31% in San Diego, how do you pronounce that? San Diego and in Encinitas. So huge, and you can actually just see the high prevalence of housing burden throughout the entire county. So now that I've created the income picture, here's the expense picture. In terms of what 6 ends meet, we know the dark green area, if the lighting was better, you can actually just see the affluence, the concentrated income there. But notice, compare the San Francisco Bay Area to other parts of the Central Valley and even Northern California. So notice Imperial County shows up here in terms of the bookend. Median household earnings in Imperial County is about $55,000, and compare that to Santa Clara County, $160,000 in median household income. in that region as well. So it's astonishing just in terms of what the income looks like throughout the entire state of California. And even here in San Diego County, look at these two differences. In the northwest portion of San Diego City, which is Del Mar Mesa, 162,000 in median household earnings. Compare that to about 68,000 in earnings, once again, community of Chula Vista National City. So notice how the data between the real cost measure, the housing burden data, and the median household income data all really represent themselves to each other pretty well in the maps as well. So I'm going to put some big picture context into this. This is some additional data that we conducted after the real cost measure was released. And this is for California alone. Between 1984 and 2021, California's gross domestic product, which of course is the value of all goods and services produced in the state, increased by 173%. But median household earnings only increased 4% during that same time frame, which tells us the middle class hasn't gotten a raise in over 4 decades. This is astonishing. And I think if we were to even put a national map over this, it would look roughly exactly the same. And Pete Manzo, our president and CEO from the United Ways of California, is always here. He's in the back. He loves this data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, where we look at a more longitudinal national context in terms of this data, all the way since the end of World War II, 1948. And look at how our productivity has kind of been off the charts, 165% productivity between 1948 and 2019. But notice how our hourly compensation, the work that we do for that productivity, has pretty much flattened out since the late 1970s. So this is a big reason in terms of what's going on with our economy today, why we feel the crunch in terms of why it's so hard to make ends meet, is because we're not being able to catch up with the rights of housing, childcare, transportation, gasoline lately, and all the basic needs. So I want to defer to Senator Atkins in just a moment and give room for the panel. But I just want to make sure that the real cost measure isn't a study that we just want to live on a website or on a bookshelf. This is a real shared experience that many families are going through each and every day. So on your website, you can find that cool interactive calculator. We can put in, select the county that you live in, the age numbers of everybody in your household, and it will show you the minimum that it takes to make ends meet, plus 1,200 household budgets to choose from. There's an interactive maps where you can actually play with those neighborhoods in San Diego County. There's one-page county fact sheets. So if you ever meet with, if you ever talk to your teenager at the dinner table after they read the refrigerator, show them the fact sheet, right? In terms of this is what it takes to make ends meet in San Diego County. Those of you who love the data, who love to go into Microsoft Excel, you can download the data and you can actually use it for it. We've gotten download requests from students who actually use this on a regular basis. Nonprofits are actually using real cost measure data for their nonprofit grant applications, intents, and foundations are even using it for the RFP process to put some more context in terms of what they're trying to fund and support within a community initiative as well. And to make sure we didn't make up our math, we have a 20-page methodology there for you if you really want to out. So with that, I want to stop here and stop talking. I want to thank you for your time, and I want to introduce Senator Atkins. Thank you so much. Senator Atkins represents the 39th Senate District, which includes San Diego, Coronado, Del Mar, Solana Beach, and parts of Rancho Santa Fe. From her 8-year tenure on the San Diego City Council to her years in the legislature, Senator Atkins has dedicated her entire career to serving as a champion for affordable housing, the environment, healthcare, veterans, women, and the LGBT community. And she is the first person in 150 years and the third person in California history to lead both houses of the California legislature. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Henry. I will.
Thank you. Thank you and good morning. I'm going to put this up here. I brought a few notes that I wanted to share with you. I'm not going to read a speech or anything, but I did want to share a little bit. Oops. Oh, thank goodness there's nothing in that. I want to thank you, Henry. Thank you for the introduction. I want to thank my colleague, Senator Padilla, for being here. And look, this is incredibly important data. And I want to thank United Ways of California for putting this together. I want to thank Nancy for convening us here in San Diego. I know there are a lot of partners here along with United Ways of California, philanthropic, others, foundations, and I just want to thank you for taking time to be here. This is really important. And to share with you, this data is important for policymakers and legislators. And I can share with you some of the things that we have done in California to try to provide some measure of support. But I'm really thrilled that as I go into my last year in the legislature, Steve Padilla is going to continue to be there. He serves on the Budget Committee, one of the key subcommittees that will be looking at the types of supports that we can continue to give. I'm really proud that this past year, despite a budget deficit, California has pretty volatile revenues, but despite a deficit, and because many of you voted and supported a rainy day fund and a reserve, we were able to hold on to the progress that we have spent the last 5 years creating. And that translates into additional services for the most vulnerable Californians. And so we were able to not make cuts. And a decade ago, when I got to the legislature, we had to make cuts. And it was always Health and Human Services. It was always these critical things that got cut. So I am really proud of California values that really look to making sure those supports are in place. Look, you know the data. I don't have to repeat it to you, and you can look it up. I just want to share with you my appreciation. It's why I'm here. I want to share a little bit of what we've done. And then I want to very quickly suggest to you to keep your voices loud, because there are folks that don't understand this calculation. They don't understand. Steve has lived experience. I grew up with 2 working parents, family of 6, 2 very hard. My dad was a coal miner. My mom was a seamstress in a factory. We didn't have health care. We had substandard housing. We were working poor people, but we had supports. And the supports came from churches and nonprofits and government to help us. We know an outdated study from the Public Policy Institute of California says if government, federal, state, local, if we did not provide a measure of support, we would have more than 2 million more poor kids in this state. So I know from my lived experience that without those kinds of supports, I wouldn't be here before you today. I wouldn't have been able to get a decent education. I would have had the before and after school breakfast program, the programs that support kids and families. I wouldn't be here. So the supports that you provide, either philanthropically or that you push us in government to do, are critical. I wanted to just share a few things that we've done as California. It is true. We are the wealthiest state and the wealthiest nation in the world. California provides more benefits than most states, except you just saw the data. And you see that we have the highest poverty rate. That's because our cost of living is higher. Housing, transportation, food, energy, water, all of those things, healthcare, are what create a cost of living that make it hard for people to live here. And I just, regardless of the methodology, the data points give a clear picture. And I love the West Wing thing. That was still my favorite show. What we've been able to do in California and to sort of hold the line and to provide as much as we can, and we cannot lose ground here. We've got real work to do, which is why I'm glad you let me come share some of this. We've done increased childcare programs, and that has also, not nearly enough, but I will tell you the Women's Caucus for the last decade has made this their #1 priority, and they have not backed off. We have not backed off, and we've had the support of our colleagues, and it's translated into more than $1 billion in the last year and a half alone. It's still not enough. We don't have enough providers. The rate, the amount of money that your child care workers need, they need a pay increase too. You know, they're living on the margins trying to provide child care. Our most precious asset is our kids. So they need a living wage. We need more slots. And so, you know, we're going to continue to focus on that, but it's not nearly enough. And the pandemic really had a negative impact on as we were gaining ground in that arena of childcare had a huge impact on providers, on families. So we are going to have to make up ground. I'm pleased with what we've done. We've improved Medi-Cal rates. Increasing Medi-Cal rates for providers means that those providers will accept Medi-Cal, so there is access to those who need it. More than a third of Californians or residents in California actually get Medicare, Medi-Cal, state funding. We have increased the rates so that we will have more providers. We have increased Medi-Cal to residents in California, and I say residents because we have increased Medi-Cal access to those who are not documented in California. So we have continued year after year. We started piecemeal because we knew we couldn't afford to do it all at once. We did young people age 26 and under. Then we went after and supported seniors. We are trying to close the gap and provide health care for as many people as possible. We embraced the Affordable Care Act. The basic benefits, we have extended as much as we can to cover as much as we can. We've reduced the cost of health insurance. We are subsidizing some of the Covered California, the Affordable Care Act program that we have. We are trying to meet working families where they are and provide more subsidies to help those families get the coverage that they need. Doesn't help if you can get Covered California, but you can't afford it for you and your family. So we're working on that. We've increased grants for struggling families that receive SSI and SSP and CalWORKS programs. We've made more strides towards debt-free college, community college. We know the way out of poverty for me was education and opportunity. So we're looking at debt-free college. It's really hard in California, you know, but we're working step by step to make it more possible. We are definitely looking at providing money to local government related to homelessness and those living on the margins and near the edges, $1 billion in funding for local efforts. We rejected proposed cuts to transportation because we know how important that is, and we made it more flexible for local jurisdictions to be able to do that work. Look, there is a lot that we can continue to do. The thing I am most proud of, people ask me all the time, what are you most proud of having done as a legislator? The earned income tax credit and increasing it and making sure that California had an earned income tax credit from the state to match the federal. We've increased it a little bit. We continue to try to push the edges because we know that that is a return on investment, not just for the families, but for the small businesses where those families spend that money and for the community. So it really is something we are working very hard with you as partners to get out to the public, so that because only 25% of those eligible actually are taking advantage of our state earned income tax credit. So we've got work to do there. I'm going to do a plug for the County of San Diego. Look, I'm not here to talk politics, but let me just say, the people you get elected that either care about these issues or have lived experiences are going to work very hard. And in the last couple of years, we've seen an about face of the county in a way that means we are focused on providing services. So I really want to call them out at the county, the supervisors who've really made that happen. Look, I really believe in this work. Some of the best work I've been able to do has been on increasing affordable housing, access to food, the money that we put into food banks. We are all in this together. And I really think it's important that you continue to hold us as elected officials accountable and share the stories. Our stories matter. I had a dear friend who's an elected official who will remain nameless, who gave me a call to kind of vent about the fact that we were talking about raising the minimum wage to $25 an hour. Look, I know it has an impact. I used to run a community clinic. If we raise the minimum wage, I got to pay my workers $25 an hour. Yes, it's difficult. But if we don't find a way to do this policy-wise, budget-wise, to provide more money, I was right in line to make sure our free clinics in California got an additional $3 million. Yes, we have to invest in organizations that provide these services. It is not easy, but please don't tell me not to support an increased wage for workers when I know exactly I know exactly that $25 an hour, I probably couldn't live on. I've had to live on it. I've had a minimum wage in my life, but actually I haven't had to live on it in a very long time. But my family did. So I just wanted to come by and say thank you. I want to be able to support you as much as I can in the work that you're doing. But this data helps hold us accountable. So to United Way, thank you for doing this. It is not an exercise in futility. When you have the data and you're well armed with the information, then you can go toe to toe with policymakers to tell us what is important. So thank you for giving me all this time to make these comments. I really appreciate you and wanted to come by and let you know myself.
Take a group photo before we do the panel.
Oh, sure. We stand here and do it that way,
Wherever you want.
so we get everybody.
Wherever you want.
Maybe everybody should stand.
Do you want to?
Sorry, I can't help myself. Yes, you were able, so we can see faces.
Stand on their chair.
Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3.
Right here. 1, 2, 3.
All right, over here, Sasha.
It's like grandma's house.
3, and then I'm 1, 2.
So important.
You're not there yet? You love
Thank you. Thank you so much. Really appreciate the work that you do. And I'm looking forward to it. Thank you so much. Pleasure. Thanks so much.
All right.
Thank you so very much, Senator President Pro Tem Toni Atkins and Senator Steve Padilla. Thank you for joining us. Thank you all again. We're going to jump right into the panel, and I'm going to introduce our panel members. Pamela Gray Payton, who is making her way up as the Chief Impact and Partnerships Officer at San Diego Foundation. Again, thank you for hosting us here.
Our pleasure.
Absolutely, thank you. Amy Denhart, who is the Director of Funders Together to End Homelessness at Catalyst of San Diego and Imperial Counties. Kim McDougall, who is the Senior Vice President of Social Services at the YMCA Child Care Resource Service. And Henry Gascon, who we all heard from earlier, the Director of Policy and Program Development at United Ways of California. Thank you all for joining us. I know we're all really excited. Like we're so excited the microphone is jumping off of the stand. All right. Do not do that again. Promise? All right. Let's start with a question to all of the panelists. What particularly struck you about the real cost measure findings?
It's just this part. You just want to speak into that part.
Go ahead.
Because I'm holding the microphone.
That's the reason why.
Well, good morning, first of all, and thank you, Nancy, and to United Way of California, Henry, for allowing us to host this important conversation. Thank you, Alicia. No, I have so many thoughts running through my head right now. Having seen this report a little bit earlier and having a chance to digest some of the data, it's just staggering. And if anything, I think it affirms what many of us believe, but just didn't have the data to support.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, here at San Diego Foundation, obviously we are working hard every day to help address some of the inequities in our region through the partnership with many nonprofits. And so knowing the challenges that our nonprofits are responding to, hearing the data, you're seeing the connection. And we're hearing every day from the nonprofits about how challenged they are because the need continues to rise, whether it's childcare support, whether it's housing support, which we all know is such a big barrier for so many people. This data just really underscores the importance of the work that we're all trying to do and the need for us to really band together and conveying this to folks outside of San Diego. Now, we struggle to make the point with funders that San Diego's needs are as great, if not greater than, many other regions of our state. And there tends to be this perception that San Diego is doing okay, that San Diego doesn't need the level of support that other regions of the state require, and that just isn't true, and the data bears that out. And so it really, sadly, it affirms what we believe and also supports some information that we'll be sharing next week about economic inequity in our region. And gives us more material, I think, to go to funders and say to those national and statewide funders that San Diego can't be left behind. That we need the same support, if not more, given some of the data that you saw today. And that we are really coming together as a community to really convey that message and to lobby for more financial resources for our region and for our communities.
Thank you. Would somebody else on the panel like to tell us what really jumped out to you in the presentation?
Sure, yeah. I think what really struck out to me in the presentation and digging into the report, kind of at the micro level, was the great disparities that exist across our county and our state. You can see from the varied colors on the map that, some areas are struggling, yes, but are doing so much better than others. The disparities are I think, really important for us to think about and focus on when we're looking at funding, when we're looking at interventions. How are we really dedicating resources to those areas that need it the most? And thinking about scaling interventions and targeting interventions in a way that help address those disparities across our state. Because it's really not okay that we're in the richest state in the country, in the richest country in the world, and we have these pockets of poverty that are astounding. So I thought that's what's really stood out to me.
Amy?
Okay, thank you. As Nancy said, I'm with Funders Together to End Homelessness San Diego, and I appreciate being asked to be here today to talk about housing, because as most of us know, the only way to solve homelessness is with housing. So most of what we do at Funders Together is related to housing and housing opportunities. So what really struck me is that I knew, and I wasn't really surprised, that 42% of households in the region are rent burdened. We see that every day. I was a little bit surprised that the San Diego numbers in terms of percentage were lower than the Bay Area numbers. That was kind of interesting to me. And then the other thing is that 25% of those people who are rent burdened are actually not below the real cost measure. So that means people of lower and middle and even some upper middle class are really struggling with rent. And talking to even people who are recruiters for the region are having a hard time recruiting people in engineering positions and the like to San Diego because of the lack of affordable housing here. So that surprised me, and we all have plenty of work to do.
Henry, you know this data inside and out, but when you first looked at it, I would like to know, when you first looked at it, what'd you go like, wow, that's kind of crazy?
Yeah, I was surprised by some of the San Diego numbers, particularly when looking at white households led by whites versus Latino households. How the white households were actually struggling most by volume, whereas usually we see it by Latinos pretty much statewide. So that was curious data to me, and it also provides an opportunity just in terms of understanding what's really going on among some of the different racial groups who are struggling each and every day.
Absolutely. So Amy, we're going to go back to you, because as you were talking about, we know the cost of housing is one of the primary barriers for families to make ends meet in California. It's been increasingly harder with inflation, the rise of interest rates, the overall lack of housing supply, especially in the aftermath of the pandemic. What do you think we can do to help improve the housing market in our community?
Yeah, just to kind of level set, in our region, in the whole county, we need to be producing about 20,000 units of housing per year, and we're doing about a third of that. And so there are many things we can do, but there are kind of three main areas that I want to focus on. One is a permanent source of funding. Two is decreasing costs, especially materials costs. And then the third is public policy and changing kind of zoning and other public policy issues. So in terms of permanent funding, the market alone is not going to build enough affordable and middle income housing. We do need to be serious about supporting subsidies, mostly government subsidies, but also philanthropy. And we are moving into that area where philanthropy is really leading in and doing a lot more work in terms of housing production, which is great. And so in terms of government subsidies, this is one of the reasons that Funders Together has endorsed and financially is supporting the 2024 Homes for San Diegans ballot measure, which in the city of San Diego would actually bring in $200 million a year for affordable housing production. And this is especially important, one, because it's year-over-year funding, and we need that predictability and just more funding into the system. And two, San Diego is missing out on getting tax credits because we don't have a local match. These ballot measures have passed in the Bay Area and in various communities, Los Angeles has passed several, but we can't compete for tax credits and to get the tax credit financing as much as our colleagues to the north because we don't have this kind of a local match. So we really do need this consistent government funding. And in terms of philanthropic funding, Funders Together founded an organization called Yes in God's Backyard, or YAPE, and we are working with faith communities. There are thousands of acres of faith communities properties in our county that can be built, more affordable housing can be built on them. So we are using philanthropic dollars actually for our first project with the Bethel AME Church. And we're using philanthropic dollars for the equity of the project. And also, which is very innovative, we're using it for loan guarantees and a line of credit. And so these are ways that philanthropy can really lean in and do more using their corpus to guarantee loans, to produce a line of credit, and really open up some opportunities for smaller infill developments like we're seeing with the big properties.
Thank you. Going on to Kim. The cost of licensed childcare is another significant barrier that prevents families from reaching the levels of the real cost measure. Many childcare workers themselves struggle financially to make ends meet, generating high turnover in that industry. What do you think we can do to kind of rein in on the cost of childcare and make it sustainable?
So unfortunately, the fundamentals of the economics behind childcare are totally broken. So we just heard from Henry in the United Way study that the price parents are currently paying for childcare is a major economic burden. Families in San Diego County are often paying upwards of 30% of their income on childcare. And this is often out of reach for many families, and it results in driving them out of the workforce. So parents are leaving the workforce, and this oftentimes lands on women. There are then developing greater economic disparities between those who can afford to work and those who cannot. And this results in a more unreliable workforce, a decrease in economic productivity overall, and just an overall increased level of stress and anxiety for families. At the same time, our childcare providers can't charge less. They cannot charge less for the care that they're providing. Providers most often are low-income women of color and are doing this essential work for poverty-level wages. They are working in poverty, as Senator Padilla said. And so we can't say that parents are going to pay less and providers are going to accept less, because that would just further devastate our childcare system. People will not continue to be childcare providers. And it's not something we should expect of any community. A recent survey we conducted of local providers indicated that 75% of our childcare providers are either operating their business at a loss or just breaking even. So this is oftentimes meaning they're not taking a salary for themselves. They are doing this work for incredibly long hours and not getting compensated for many of those hours. And it's not a business that you're going to go into to be able to make a profit and make a living wage. And so we are really trying to work to understand, first of all, what is that true cost of providing high quality care? Were you to pay yourself an adequate wage, actually pay yourself for the hours that you're working, actually cover your true costs of your rent and your food, and invest back into your business. And so we've been having conversations with providers recently to just kind of understand from them, okay, when you're setting your rates, what are you including in those rates? And we're asking them, are you counting the hours that you're working on the weekend to go do the grocery shopping for your childcare? And they say no. Are you counting the hours you're working at night after the kids leave to clean up and set up for the next day? No. Are you counting the hours you're doing your professional development to improve the quality of your care? No. We know that our childcare provider community needs to make way more money to be accounted to account for the actual work that they're doing. And so for there to be an adequate supply, right now there's not an adequate supply. There's only enough licensed capacity for 45% of families that need care in our county. And for there to be high quality care available, there actually needs to be an increase in the cost of care so that providers can get paid for their time, get paid a living wage, and the cost burden needs to shift from parents to a combination of parents and public funding. Parents cannot carry this burden on their own and should not be expected to, as they're not expected to for our K-12 system. Can you imagine if every parent had to pay for the K-12 system? It would completely collapse. A purely market-based economic model will never pencil out in this childcare space. So our federal government has a really important role to play, I think, in providing public funding in this space. So does our state government, so does our local government. So as you were talking about, kind of a dedicated revenue stream, that's something that I think can be a very important element of helping balance the economics of childcare. And the federal government has a really important role to play in terms of kind of setting those standards, which they have over the last few years. They've said that really a family should not be spending more than 7% of their income on childcare, and providers should be making what a K-12 teacher makes. A childcare provider should be making what a kindergarten teacher makes. And those benefit or those budget asks that have come through to support that in recent years have not passed, unfortunately. So that's really an important element that needs to change in order to solve this challenge.
Thank you. Pamela, can you solve this for us? No. How can nonprofits, philanthropy, the big business sector, and the elected officials better engage with one another to address these disparities that were presented in the real cost measure?
Well, to answer your first question, no.
Yeah, you got the hard one.
Thank you for your honesty.
But we can solve these problems. And where I think, we are going as a region is recognizing that there is true benefit in collaboration. That none of the problems we've heard today can be solved by any single agency, but that it really is through collaboration and obviously, the support of government that the solution rests. So for San Diego Foundation in 2021, we were able to found the San Diego Regional Policy and Innovation Center. And it is a collaboration with the County of San Diego as well as with the Brookings Institution to really look at these regional problems. Nothing that we've heard here today knows boundaries. Childcare shortages aren't unique to the city of San Diego. They're problematic across the county. The problem with housing affordability is a county-wide issue. And so when we look at all of these problems and all of the efforts that have been made for decades now to resolve them, we've done them in isolation and not collaboratively for the most part. And so what I hope, we are starting to realize is that we're so much stronger when we're working together. And that for us, it was really through COVID, I think that we recognized the strength of collaboration and really working together to bring together those people who are most impacted by these issues, as well as the nonprofit sector, government entities, business entities, everyone, bringing them to the table to look at these as region-wide issues that deserve a region-wide response. And so fortunately, there have been so many dollars unlocked by the federal government in the last few years as a result of COVID and the tragedy that it was. But it really has allowed us to tap into resources that we previously did not have access to. And so, together, yes, I believe that these problems can be resolved. Will it take some time? Absolutely. Hearing Amy speak to the shortages of affordable housing right now, and now we're needing 20,000 units a year, and we're somewhere around a third of that in terms of what's currently being developed. San Diego Foundation has launched a housing fund, and that is going to be a part of the solution, but not solely going to solve the problem. But I really think that, in its purpose to bring together all of the groups that you mentioned and so many others as regional partners to solve these regional-wide problems, there is hope. And can we solve them immediately? I wish the answer was yes. It burdens all of us every day when we see the problems that our communities are facing. It's disheartening and certainly could be enough to tell folks, I throw my hands up, I'm done, we can't do this. But I don't believe that. I believe that we can do this and that it's going to take sustained support, a lot of really wise people, and really the ability to bring, or our intentional effort to bring folks together from all sectors of our region, including those people that we're trying to support, to hear from them directly, as Kim has mentioned with the childcare providers, to really get at solutions to these really, really big problems.
Thank you. And Henry, what other opportunities does this real cost measure study provide in raising the standard of living for families in our community? What else should we be thinking about?
Yeah, thanks, Nancy. One of the virtues about the real cost measure is that it allows us an opportunity to engage both individually and collectively. So we talked about how we can actually use this as a financial literacy tool within our own families, especially when kids, teenagers open the refrigerator doors. But even creating a curriculum for the real cost measure and the cost of living within our high schools and even our colleges, right? We all know about the financial literacy courses that we took in college. They weren't there, right? Especially when you were signing your student loan papers. So being able to create those opportunities just on an individual level is great, but also just collectively, as Senator Atkins talked about, is being involved in your community, being an advocate, letting your voices heard, attending city council meetings. And one of the things that we're going to be releasing on our website over the next couple of weeks are legislative profiles. So you can actually engage elected officials at the congressional level, at the state senate level, and at the state assembly level. So you can actually show them the neighborhoods that are struggling within their jurisdictions, and you're gonna get their attention with that as well. An opportunity to really engage housing providers in terms of what we can do to incentivize them to build more affordable housing. What can we do as electeds to actually help them out as part of that process? What we can do with the state to help change the economics of childcare so that we can increase the reimbursement rates that many of these childcare centers are getting each and every day so that we can actually make it affordable and increase the supply of childcare throughout the state. So being able to think about these opportunities both on an individual and a collective level is really where it starts. And we're going to go ahead and visit, Pete and I are visiting many other ways and having these community conversations throughout the entire state so we can actually bring people together. Unlikely stakeholders like electeds and housing developers and transportation officials and nonprofits who normally aren't in the same room together is figuring out what we can do together to help address the cost of living. It's not no one's fault, and no one agency can fix this alone, but what we can do together to actually help address the cost of living crisis in our community.
And to end this on a little bit of a really upward kind of thing, like if you had a magic wand, we all want it, to help improve the cost of living crisis in California, especially for the low-income families, what would you do? You got the mic.
Well, it's probably obvious what I'm going to say. I would wave my wand and build 3.5 million more housing units for a mixed income in mixed communities with 50% open space in vibrant transit-oriented neighborhoods.
I would borrow her wand. And I would like do a little add-on to her wand of those communities having accessible, high-quality, funded childcare for the families that live in those communities, where they can access a mixed delivery system. They can take their children to care that meets their needs of their, their culture, their language needs, their preference of hours and size and type of care they look for, and that was all incorporated into their community. And they could access it and have a true choice and not be burdened by having to make a choice about going to work or not.
Hey Pamela, what are you gonna add to that?
I've had too much time to think about this now in the last 10 seconds. I really would love to see every child living in poverty in our region able to access their chosen pathway to prosperity. And so frankly, that means giving families more money and making sure that families have the resources they need to meet their families' needs, so that our children are not repeating the cycle that their families are in, and that they have the opportunity to be Senator Toni Atkins someday, or whatever it is that they choose to do.
So true. Henry, you wanna add the last word with your magic wand?
I want to share all of your magic wands too.
Right, yeah.
Those are great wands. But Senator Padilla was talking about his cost of living bill that he's trying to get passed to the legislator, and being able to change the official poverty measure here in the U.S. That's inspired by the real cost measure that actually speaks to the true cost of living by taking into account housing, food, healthcare, transportation, all the other basic things to talk about. That way we can actually begin a national conversation in terms of the hardships that we're experiencing every day and what we can do to help that families.
Thank you. Did y'all just see what I did? That mic's coming for you today. Thanks. It is. So I'm taking this out because we're gonna have questions for all of you guys. I just bopped myself in the mouth. So I'm going to let y'all ask questions of our panel. Who has a question?
Yeah, right. Or a lot of money.
Do all the United Ways in the country have this, or is it just California?
It's just in California for now, but we're actually working with other states and other United Ways to actually really inspire national conversation around this as well. But we're supporting all 28 local United Ways throughout the California by actually having the community convenings to talk to begin the conversation.
Okay, make it quick. When you calculated the household income, we know that San Diego has such a high population of military families. Did you include the military housing stipend into that analysis?
Not the stipend specifically, but we just look at the entire household population that has working households. So those actually reported federal taxes and state income taxes. Those are the ones that we captured. But we can probably I can see offline to see what we have done specifically for veterans and see what that population looks like. Because we know in San Diego County, they represent a significant population.
Yeah, it'd be interesting.
How long has this measure, like data, I guess, from methodology been around? I'm just curious if it's made an impact on policies yet, or if it's relatively new.
Yeah, we've been developing it since 2015. This is the 5th real cost measure study that we released. So we keep going around throughout the whole state to have this conversation. And, we've had, as I mentioned before, we had nonprofits and foundations who have actually used this data to apply for nonprofit grants and to put it out as well. And I think the biggest one so far is Senator Padilla's bill, where we actually used that on the inspiration of the real cost measure to create a cost of living bill. So the conversation is growing. It's on the local level, but we want broader conversations to happen as a result of this.
It's pretty huge.
Other questions?
Questions for them, please. I want to hear from you. What's your magic wand answer? what one thing would you do to help improve the cost of living for Californians, especially here in San Diego County? Changing it up, putting it all on me.
I'd say from a childcare perspective, if there's anything we can do on state level to increase the eligibility of Head Start, that would be incredible. I mean, Head Start is the most comprehensive support for families, but because those eligibility indicators are based on federal poverty guidelines, we have a lot of empty spaces there and a lot of opportunities for children and families to reap that benefit.
Anybody else with a magic wand?
Thanks. I'll try to briefly answer, but really I have a question. For me, I think a lot about, and somebody spoke about it earlier, like San Diego is okay, right? And I think part of the reason that is the case is because there are a lot of really successful, booming, growing industries here in San Diego that create a lot of wealth for the region, but so my magic wand would be to make those pathways accessible to local San Diegans. Because what often happens is that people that grow up and live here can't get life science jobs or biotech jobs. And so we recruit from outside of San Diego or California, and we essentially push out people who grow up here and replace them with those who sort of already have that income making capacity. And so my question, I guess, is what are the unique strengths I think that San Diego does bring? It is, when I talk about California or San Diego, outside of people from San Diego, we have that military community combined with tourism. We have a binational experience. We have, again, those growing industries. So there's a lot of strength. I'd love to hear your perspective about what are those strengths that we bring as San Diego that could help to really drive and change the situation that we're in and create some of those solutions.
Thank you for that really great question. One of the things that we've come to realize is that there is such opportunity in developing stronger workforce opportunities for people. There are a lot of San Diegans and a lot of people in San Diego who are skilled workers. How do we upskill those folks and give them access to those positions in life sciences and all of the other places where employers are saying they can't hire enough people fast enough because the workforce just isn't local. And so trying to recruit people, you run into the problems that Amy mentioned, and they're looking at the cost of living in San Diego and saying, that doesn't make sense for me to move my family to San Diego for this job, even though the salary is good, given the cost of living in comparison to wherever they might be or other options they have on the table. So we're doing a lot here at San Diego Foundation to really provide resources for folks to be stipend, if that's what's necessary to help them train, move from one role to another role that is going to give them access to a lot of these jobs. Not all of these jobs require 4-year or 6-year, 8-year degrees. Some of them, if it's just a matter of giving me the right skill set, I will have access to open that door and sit down in a role that is going to change my life and change the lives of our family members. So we are doing a lot of that work. We also have something new that PIC is working on, and it's called the Workforce Fund, and it will provide stipends to folks to train in many of these skilled labor roles that are currently vacant.
Thank you. Anybody else have a magic wand item? One of the things, oh, there's one back here.
I apologize in advance because this is a not fully formed question, but I'd love to hear the panel's kind of take on it. As it pertains to women coming out of the workforce for maternity leave, and we know that childcare is an ever unavailable resource, as we've been discussing, has there been any legislative work towards expanding maternity leave or providing additional pay while parents are trying to raise their young ones, since UTK isn't officially out there?
I might need to tap a policy person to know if there's an actual policy pushed around this, but I think that there's definitely a role for employers to play in this space. As employers have their women leave on maternity leave or need to leave the workforce for childcare, what can our employers do to augment what the state provides around maternity leave, providing extended periods of time that moms can stay home when their babies are little, dads can stay home when their babies are little, and that time can be covered by the employer. And then what can employers do when the mom comes back to help either subsidize the cost of childcare for that mom, or have a flexible schedule and let the parent work around having the child at home and also getting their job done. So I think that I think it's in this case, I don't necessarily think it's all about legislating. I think there's obviously a role to play in more paid family leave for sure. But I think employers also need to step up and understand that they play a really important role in helping the workforce and particularly working moms.
Nancy, may I interject just for a moment? And I apologize, it's not for the last question, but the prior question regarding the workforce. One of the greatest opportunities we have is to provide our students with access to college, and to make sure that they can persist and continue and graduate from college. And so collectively, scholarship resources are so important to students, particularly our first-gen students. And there is a lot of work that is happening here at San Diego Foundation around that, but I think all of us, really can look at scholarship resources as a way to support building that workforce that San Diego has available. What we're seeing right now for a lot of our students, we have on average about $4 million that we're awarding scholarships to students. Most of those are first generation students. This past year was about 1,000 of them, but they're not coming back to San Diego in the highest numbers. So once they graduate and they receive that degree, what can we do to attract them back to the region to work in the region where their families are usually? It's the cost of living. And so it's lowering that cost of living, creating the opportunities within the workforce that is going to help us draw some of those students back. But before that, providing more support to students, scholars. Thank you, Nancy.
Good morning. Thank you all for the opportunity today. I think it's really impactful to have the data to support the stories that people are sharing about their struggles every day to support justifying making the policy changes. And I was curious to hear you all's thoughts on how can we create some of this change through localizing the economy, and specifically through like cooperatives and cooperatives like localizing the economy and bringing that wealth back to community members and keeping it in those communities. I work specifically with the Promise Zone initiative, and childcare is something that we're talking about as well. Like you said, mostly BIPOC women doing this, and so I guess is there conversations about in general like localizing economies, and then considering about housing in Oakland. There's the East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative, and they're looking at the speculative market and how that causes the huge rent disparities that people are struggling with. And so how could addressing that through cooperative structures as well?
One of the really core elements of our childcare provider kind of landscape and community are family childcare providers. So family childcare providers are often running a small business in their community. They're very connected to the community. They're serving 8 to 14 children. And they are an incredible kind of, I would say, asset to the childcare infrastructure. There's over 3,600 of them in San Diego County, and they truly are keeping that money in the community, supporting a small business, oftentimes low-income women of color that are, we see them if they're able to get by in this really difficult industry, they'll move from being a family childcare provider to a center, or own a center, and be able to kind of, develop their business to a point where they can actually make a living. And so I think the more we can focus on kind of lifting up our family childcare provider community, that really gets to your point of like lifting up community and being more localized. In terms of, cooperative and that kind of thing, we work a lot on thinking about shared services. So how do we bring family childcare providers together and help them with a shared service approach where we can help elevate their marketing cases. We can help them develop a business case, understand how to develop their policies, set their pricing, really build those business skills of our family childcare providers and try and create some collective power for them to potentially have a substitute rule or invest in some kind of accounting or tax supports that they may not be able to access individually. So the shared service approach is really a way that we've tried to kind of build that collective power of the family childcare provider community.
Thank you. Oh, go ahead, Amy.
Well, in terms of cooperatives, I love that idea for housing. I don't know a lot about the Oakland model, but I had the opportunity to go to Vienna for the social housing field study, and we looked at cooperatives there that were, a group of 18 people or households would work together, and there were financial institutions, banks set up to do lending for 18 people and architects and that sort of thing. So the cooperative model there is kind of new and innovative, and they're just creating that industry. But I think we need to look at all of the above. We need to look at community land trusts. We need to look at cooperatives. We need to look at modular in terms of production. We just really need to increase innovation in the housing industry in order to, and we need to think about innovation in the finance industry for housing. We've been doing it the same way with mortgages and financing housing for so long. We really need to be more innovative in that way and spur innovation.
Thank you. Anybody else? Well, yeah. I'm getting my steps in.
I think just to echo, but pretty much affordable housing, we've talked about wages and then increasing wages for like the frontline workers. Like it's not uncommon. I work for a homeless shelter in Vista. The reality is that sometimes the people that we're serving are making more than my case managers, and they're having to choose between like keeping the lights off and putting food on the table. And these are the people that are helping individuals get back on their feet. So I think like for us, that's something that we're constantly dealing with. So again, affordable housing, we don't have enough of it. And then wages for the people we're serving as well as for the frontline workers that are doing the work. And again, they're only able to work at our shelter because they have a second person also providing. If it were to be their only job, they would not be able to do the work that they're doing because they are not getting paid enough to do it. I mean, I have a master's degree and I'm $250,000 in debt. And I work for a nonprofit. And that's just the reality of the matter. And it's more than just the people we're serving, but the people that are providing the work as well.
Good point. Go ahead.
Absolutely, yeah, we see that all the time in our field. One of the things in terms of advocacy is government contracts. Yeah. Government contracts often cap admin at 5%. Why is that? So we need to be pushing our federal and state governments to increase the percentage of administrative costs allowed. That's just one thing that we can do.
Amen to that. Right. All right. Thank you all so very much for coming. I hope that this was really eye-opening for you and that you see ways that you can use this information. I want to thank our panelists for joining us today, Henry, for putting this all together. United Ways of California, Pete, thank you so much for spearheading it all. But it's really important information, as you can see and as you can hear. And my parting words are not only to think about it individually and how you can use it in the work that you're doing, but how do we actually make something happen from this information here in San Diego County. That we don't go off and work in our silos in our areas, take this information, but how do we really start to look at it from a community-wide perspective? I'd really like to see that happen. So thank you again for being here today. Thank you all again.